Time now for Smart Charts with Abigail Doolittle, where we're going to take a look at the timely topics through the charts. And this week, Abigail, you're doing an informal best of Smart Charts from 2019.
Indeed, Romaine, because so many great charts were brought to us by some of the top technicians on this street. And there were a few, many in fact, that stood out from 2019. But in the latter part of the year, here are three that stood out probably the most to me. And this one comes to us from Frank Capillari of Instinet. It is on small cap. He presented it in early December. It's a longer term chart, as you can see, going back about a decade. Up top, IWM, the small cap ETF. On bottom, and this is really a very powerful part of the chart, small cap relative to the S&P 500. So you can see over the last decade during this huge bull market, small cap's really been underperforming, but it's been doing so pretty reliably within this trend channel. So Frank was pointing out the areas of bottoming that we had back in 2012, then in 2014 and 2016, that represented a buying opportunity on small cap. He, of course, is pointing out the buying opportunity that seems to have appeared at the end of 2019. Frank thinks that we are going to see a stock market rally in 2020, and certainly the first day point in case, but he thinks that small cap is a more attractive place to put money. Now, this is very interesting because if we take into account another chart that has stood out to me, and this one comes to us from Paul Ciana of Bank of America Merrill Lynch, who is their rate strategist. This is the small cap relative to the long bond, and long bond relative to small cap. And so Paul Ciana is making the point that it appears we could be in an area where the long bond, the 30-year Treasury, is going to outperform small cap. If that occurred, it would probably be risk off. But we see an area of that back in the early 90s, then in the early 2000s, and then, of course, going into the financial crisis, where bonds were really outperforming small cap, that in a huge way during the financial crisis. Over the last 10 years, coming off in this risk-on period, but Paul Ciana is making the point that it appears we recently put in a bottoming there as well. It's going to be interesting to see whether Paul Ciana of Bank of America Merrill Lynch is correct, or Frank Capillari over at Instinet. Two powerful charts to keep in mind, and this truly a long-term one. And then finally, Ari Wald over at Oppenheimer. He brought to us an emerging market chart that I'm trying to pull up, but it's not quite pulling up, and I think that we'll have some assistance from the control room on bringing up this EM chart. But Ari Wald has been bullish over the last couple of years. He did have a correct call on the downturn back in early 2016, but he's otherwise been bullish. And in the October of 2019, he was especially bullish on the emerging markets at that time, saying it was an area to look to for rotation. This is the EEM, and we see in 2018 the huge downtrend and then the bottoming base. He's making the point that at the end of 2018 into 2019, an area of resistance was taken out that did lead to gains. And lo and behold, we have a similar area of resistance taken out here, suggesting that emerging markets, as they have been rallying recently, so Ari really called that correctly back in October, Joe, he likes the emerging markets as one area of outperformance here in 2020.